Hey everybody, this is going to go over how I installed this ATOTO F7G2A7WE double DIN stereo head unit into this 1996 Jeep Grand Cherokee. This will work for 96 and 98 Jeep Grand Cherokees, and this will enable you to have Android Auto or Apple CarPlay along with all the goodies such as voice navigation, hands-free calling, Spotify, YouTube Music, all that good stuff. Anyway, stay tuned. Okay, so I currently have the dash bezel pulled off and the head unit pulled out because I'm actually in the process of removing a totally unneeded steering wheel interface adapter, which we'll cover that later in this video. So here's the thing about the Grand Cherokee ZJ and why it's been so difficult over the years to put a double DIN head unit in this vehicle. And that's because these vehicles, pretty much all the vehicles from Chrysler, I think a lot of GMs back in the 1990s, they were just so in love with the 1.5 DIN stereo head unit. Bigger than a single DIN, but not quite as big as a double DIN. Now there are actually aftermarket 1.5 DIN head units out there that I believe are marketed as single DIN, that you can fit into these vehicles to make full use of that 1.5 DIN opening. Now, in the past, what people would do to install a double DIN unit in this vehicle is they would actually completely gut these center vents to make the opening big enough for that double DIN unit. Now, there are a couple or so of double DIN head units out there that are technically single DIN but just have a double DIN screen. I think Sony makes one, Pioneer makes one, but they're extremely expensive, like $600, maybe even $700 I think I've seen. And when you're doing this for an old vehicle, it's just like you don't really want to spend that kind of money on a head unit when there are head units out there that are much, much, much cheaper. So back in the summer of this year, basically what I did is I purchased a Metra dash kit, which was advertised as a double DIN dash kit that basically says it requires use of an L-shaped head unit. More or less, the radio body or the head unit's body is a single DIN unit that slides into the Jeep's opening in the dash, but the front of it is a double DIN screen. So when everything's all tidied up, it looks like a double DIN unit. So the problem is, again, as I mentioned, that 1.5 DIN opening. Now, one thing I've done in here is I have taken my my cutoff wheel, or actually not my cutoff wheel, but my oscillating tool, and I cut out all this plastic in here to make this opening a little bigger. So you may have to do that to install this AOTO unit, but that's one thing that should be noted. Now, the thing about the AOTO F7G2A7WE is this unit, along with several other units from AOTO, are extremely thin from front to back. That is basically how we are able to use this unit in this vehicle, because the hack here is the AOTO F7G2A7WE is skinny enough to fit in between the Jeep's stock opening and the dash trim. Now, I do think you might have to cut away some of that plastic. However, you might actually not have to. The reason why I initially did that was I was trying to fit this JBC unit in here, which I'll have to note the model up top. I had purchased that unit because it was marketed as an L-shaped unit, but lo and behold, the L shape was the wrong way around. The radio body was at the bottom instead of the top where I needed it for this installation, so therefore I could not use that unit in this vehicle. So this AOTO was actually purchased kind of last minute in a hurry. I needed something that I could get here prime next day because this is my daily driver and I wanted to have a radio back in this thing. The original radio had died, but I wanted to get this thing back up and running, so I purchased this unit kind of last minute, and let's just say I'm pretty impressed with it. I've actually installed two of these in my parents' vehicles, a GMT 800 Silverado HD, as well as a facelifted first generation Honda Pilot. And both my parents are very pleased with this unit. So to get this AOTO to fit, there's a couple of things you got to do to both the installation kit that comes with this head unit, as well as the Metra dash kit. Now the Metra dash kit, which I'll include a screenshot of the Amazon listing here, is way overpriced in my opinion. I think it's way overpriced for a few pieces of ABS plastic, and that's kind of what you get with Metra. Some of their stuff is cheap, whereas some of their stuff is insanely overpriced. This is what you get. Now there is a chance that you probably could model up and 3D print these parts, but more or less you get this piece here that goes onto the side of the head unit, as well as this trim piece, which I'm going to pop out of here, that goes on your dash. So you more or less you're able to retain your stock vents. And there's also a third piece that goes in here, which I should note requires cutting to make room for the AOTO to slide in. And what I've done here is I've used aluminum tape to more or less fill in that hole. That way air is directed to the vent like it's supposed to. So there's that, and you also have to cut out part of your dash here, which I have pictures going into more detail on that. You have to cut out some of your dash, and you also have to cut off a piece of the dash kit, because more or less the factory radio has a big screw that goes like right about here, and it's simply in the way of where the AOTO slides in. So you have to cut that out. And what I ended up having to do was I ended up having to glue this in, and this worked fine. The upper side over here, you can still use that. And of course, as you just seen, this installation kit from Metra comes with a replacement opening for the radio that retains your climate vents below the head unit. So to install that, you do have to remove the original vents from the dash bezel, as well as everything you see here. And it's important that you pay close attention to the directions, because they might seem a little confusing. It might seem like you have to cut everything. Like for example, this line here, you might think you have to cut all that out. Trust me, how I know. I mistakenly did that with my first dash trim and messed it up. Had to go to pull apart and get me a second one to do it right. So make sure you follow the directions very closely, very carefully. Only cut there, there, and there. And actually, before you do that, you actually cut out the vents first, and then you do that. And once you do that, this opening, or excuse me, this new trim will just pop right in and look near factory. There is a modification you do have to do to the AOTO's brackets to make it fit into the Jeep's opening, is you actually have to trim off the bottom portion of these side brackets. It's easy to do if you have a pair of 10 snips. You can just cut that right off. And what that does, it more or less makes this these side brackets the equivalent of a single or 1.5 DIN unit. That way it slides right in to this opening here. Now of course, as I mentioned earlier, you do have to cut off from the dash the original provision for the lower left screw, because it's just in the way of this unit here. Other than that, I think that's about it as far as having to modify your dash. It does require a little work to make it work, but it's definitely doable. Now the other thing I have done is down here I replaced the stock cigarette lighter with this USB port that more or less the cable runs up through the dash, and there's a USB plug right there. It plugs into the USB cable on the back of the head unit. That way I have a USB port down here to plug my phone into to charge it, and also to connect it to Android Auto if I want to do it wired. So there's also steering wheel controls. So this Jeep has steering wheel controls. It's limited, so it has the steering wheel controls for the radio on the back of the steering wheel. Not sure how well this is picking up. Yeah, right there. That's the one sort of volume, and on the other side you have 3 other buttons. We have an up and down and a center button. Those can be tied in with the radio, which I'll be covering here in just a moment when I begin discussing the wiring. So aside from the aftermarket wiring harness adapter you'll need to connect your factory wire harness together with. The AOTO unit has this connection here for the Wi-Fi antenna. That's just stuck right up here inside the dash. That Wi-Fi antenna is for the wireless Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. You also have this microphone. Now, I do recommend you use the microphone that comes with this unit, because the microphone that's actually in the front, so it does have an internal microphone right there, but it's not that good of quality. The sound is not that great, so I do suggest running the included microphone over to your steering wheel like I have here, and just have it stuck into place right there, and that works very well. Also, you have the factory antenna connection for the head unit. In this case, you do not need an antenna adapter because the Jeep already has the correct plug ready to go. So you just plug that right into the back of the radio. So now we're going to go inside and cover the wiring. Okay, so let's take a moment to have a look at the wiring for the AOTO head unit inside the Jeep ZJ Grand Cherokee. So with Chrysler vehicles and Jeeps and Dodges of the time period, I think mid 1980s through, I want to say middle 2000s, something like that, you have two plugs on the back of the stock head unit, and you also have a separate ground connection, which the radio itself had this spade on the back, and this is chassis ground, and you're actually going to have to get you a one of these pieces and crimp onto a wire to act as your ground, because the ground is actually not in these two plugs here. So for the most part, it is wire to wire, color to color, with one exception. This blue wire here, which on the Metra harness is labeled power antenna, and the ZJ with the pass-through amplifier, if I'm not mistaken, this is actually used to power on the factory amplifier that's under the back seat. And that is the case with mine. That's how my amplifier turns on with the head unit. So in this case with the AOTO head unit, you don't actually connect the solid blue wire to the power antenna wire. You actually connect that to amplifier turn on right here. So amplifier turn on, which is black with which is blue with a black stripe, that gets connected to the solid blue on this Metra harness. Everything else in here is, again, color to color. You just match up all the various colors and you're good to go. And of course, you're going to have that separate connection you want to make for your ground. So what I've done here is I have the main ground coming into here. This is the main ground from the head unit, and I also have a second ground wire coming off of here. This is going to be for our steering wheel controls, which we'll cover here in just a moment. So the AOTO head unit harness has a lot of extra wires you don't need. We just had those tied off to the side and actually have heat shrink over the ends of them. Now, as you can probably see, I'm using heat shrink tubing on all these. So all these connections are soldered together. I prefer soldering because it's a good solid connection. And then heat shrink everything. So in this case, we have a few electrical wires. A power antenna wire is here. Now, if let's say you're using an antenna that uses a powered amplifier, you would connect this up to the antenna's amplifier. Also, we have parking brake over here. Now, with the AOTO head unit, you do not have to ground this parking brake connection. You just leave it like it is. In fact, by default, the AOTO has the what's called video prohibition turned off. Now, if you turn that on, you will need to have this actually connected to your parking brake switch. But just in most cases, you'll probably just be leaving that off and leaving this disconnected. Here we have our rear camera plus. So if you have a backup camera, I believe this is where you get your power for that. I don't actually have a backup camera in my vehicle. I could put one in the future maybe. So we'll just leave that like it is. Power antenna, I think we covered that already. We also have two different steering wheel interface connections. We have SW or SWC key plus, or steering wheel key plus, which is this orange and black. And I think the color of the wire And the steering column on a Jeep is orange and black. Now, I do have a picture of that, and I'll have to just cover that in a later part of the video. But what's interesting is there's also a second steering wheel key wire, which is tied up in here. It's steering wheel key pound. It's got the little pound or little pound sign. That's just tied up because we're not actually, here it is right there, steering wheel key pound plus. So that's just tied up and not used. It's actually brown with a black stripe. The interesting thing about the AOTO head unit is you do not need a steering wheel interface adapter. I bought this because the head unit I originally intended to put into my Jeep was this JVC unit, which, as you can see, it's way too big. It will not fit. This unit does require use of a steering wheel interface adapter. The AOTO does not, and that would apply for vehicles that have an analog resistor network steering wheel interface. So the buttons in your steering wheel, they're connected with two wires, one going to ground and one actually connecting to either the steering wheel control interface or the head unit. And what that does is it's a resistor network, and when you press a specific button on your steering wheel, what that does is it actually changes the resistance of the pull down wire, and that tells the head unit which button you're pressing on your steering wheel. So the reason why the AOTO does not need a steering wheel interface adapter is because it has it built in. There's a menu in the AOTO head unit, which we'll cover later in this video, where you can go in and set up your steering wheel controls. So it's able to learn your steering wheel interface of your specific vehicle. Now, if your vehicle communicates steering wheel commands through, let's say, the body control module. Now, my Jeep, for example, was like this. If your vehicle is like this, then yes, you would have to use a steering wheel interface adapter. Now, the thing is, PAC, for example, and I believe also Access, which is a very expensive unit. This is like $30. I think the Access is like $70. So, on vehicles that communicate over the CCD bus or a body control module, like more or less a digital signal, you will have to use one of these in conjunction with the AOTO. But in the Jeep, you do not. We actually will be cutting two wires in the steering column and running new wires up into the radio area, which I've already done, to tie in with the head unit. So think about that. This unit is dirt cheap, and it also does not require purchasing a steering wheel control interface. But yes, overall that is the wiring. So anyways, I'm going to get this all wired up, or excuse me, tied up, and we'll go out and finish up. We got to connect these two wires to our steering wheel control interface, wires coming from the steering column. Okay, so I went ahead and connected the two steering wheel signal connections to the harness. So these two wires here that I ran under the dash and down inside the steering column, and I have a picture of the wires I tapped into. One thing I should note that there are small wires and there are big thick wires with the same color. You do not cut into the big thick wires because for one thing, most of them wires go to the ignition switch, the airbag, and things like that. You do not want to be messing with that. You'll end up in big trouble if you mess with that. Leave that alone. You only mess with the two small wires of the specified colors, which again be in the photo. And what I did is I actually tapped in down inside here. I'm not going to take this off to really show you here, but you'll see in the picture where I tapped into the wire harness down below the steering column, or at least the bottom of the steering column. And the reason is I did not want to take all this apart to get into it inside here next to where the clock spring connector is. So I just tapped in down inside this area and ran the wires up through here. Simple as that. Now, just for review, you have, of course, the two plugs that went to the back of the radio. The new Metra harness plugged into that. We have our chassis ground here, which used to connect into the chassis of the radio. Now we have that new wire harness, the grounding wire harness that plugs into this that we had to make ourselves. You also have, again, the 2 wires for steering wheel. You have your microphone here. You have, specific to the AOTO, this Wi-Fi connection. Now, the stock Jeep harness also has this connection here. This was the connection to the CCD bus, to the body control module, because the stock radio in this unit received commands from that to, of course, for the buttons on the steering wheel. Also, it also used to auto dim based off the light sensor. I think I said up there. Unfortunately, you do kind of lose that functionality with the aftermarket radio, but that's a minor inconvenience. We also have this USB connection, which goes to down here to this USB port I put in place of the cigarette lighter. It's not too hard to do that. You got to take the bottom part of the dash off, which, again, not too hard to do. The bottom part of the dash is a little more difficult to get into. If you don't wish to do that, you can just use the USB port on the front of this unit. To get the dash off, it's not too hard. You have the 2 trim pieces here, and then you have some screws around here, and then you have the screws up top, and the whole thing just pulls out. Okay, so I got the head unit sit back into the dash. As you can see, it's working. And what's interesting about the AOTO is, apparently, once you've had it powered up for a while, or less installed in your vehicle for a while, it must have an internal battery that charges off of its power source, and after it's been more or less charged up for a while, you can have this radio out for a little while, and it will retain your presets for your radio. Like, for example, there's all my presets still in place. I didn't lose those or anything like that. Let me turn this down. That's right, so my steering wheel controls ain't working just yet. We got to set those up. So, for example, I'm going to go back to home, and let's go ahead and try to set up our steering wheel controls. So we're going to go in to our main menu here, go over to settings, go over to SWC key. So right now it has the more or less all the settings from the pack output are in here. What we got to do is clear those. And now we can go ahead and begin programming this. So I'm going to start by pressing volume up on the steering wheel and holding it. I'm going to tap volume up here. And you can see it saved. Now I'm going to press the down volume button on the steering wheel. And I'm going to press this button here. That saved our volume down. Now what's cool about the AOTO is, I'm sorry, my hands are in the way. What's cool about the AOTO is it allows you to set your steering wheel button to do whatever you want. So the Jeep has, on the left side of the steering wheel, has an up and down button, and I believe that's to sift through up and down through your radio presets on the factory radio. And with this, you can have it do that. Also, you can have it set up to answer or hang up the phone. So, for example, I'm going to press up. I'm going to tap this button here, and that's saved. And I'm going to press down, press this button here, and I'm going to say that'll save that. Now there's a center button as well. The only issue is I want to use that to summon the Google Assistant, but for some reason with this head unit, when you press that center button or you press the mic button, it instead summons the mic assistant or the Google Assistant on my phone. I don't understand why it's doing that. Apparently it's a bug either with this head unit or if it's a bug with Android Auto, because I've seen online people reporting this issue with even with vehicles that came factory installed with Android Auto and CarPlay. So for now, I'm going to actually press the center button and I'm going to have that set up for home. I could do mode. I think mode might have been the default for the original, or it might have been mute. I don't know for sure. But now, for example, when I press OK, it says it's saved successfully. Let me press the center button here to go back home. And you can see our steering wheel controls are working. Now, for example, I can press up, and you can see we're actually going through radio presets, which is pretty nice. And I should note that the up and down, the seek up and down buttons also work in YouTube Music and Spotify, because I listen to Spotify a lot, and also sometimes YouTube Music. Maybe more now, since YouTube Music has apparently fixed an issue with volume normalization. But anyways, we are ready to put the dash bezel back on, since we are back up and running now. Okay, so I got the dash trimmed back together. Now I should note the bezel here on these ZJs, sometimes it doesn't get the best fit against the front of the head unit. There used to be a gap there, but what I did is I actually put in, there's a little trim piece that goes around the edge of the unit. Normally you shouldn't have to put that in there, but in this case I did, to try to close in that gap. So it ain't perfect, but it doesn't look bad. So anyways, let's go ahead and start this up. And I should note that I had set the boot logo on this to be the Jeep logo, and I covered that in a video on this unit. So very quick startup, and it's actually going in Android Auto, so I'm at the blurred screen for a moment here. So I'm going to see what it does here. Okay, let me get out of this. Do not want it showing my map. So okay, there we are. So we're back home. So you can see there is our volume working on the factory steering wheel controls. Turn that down a little bit. Now, for example, I can change stations using the left controls. Now, if I want to go back to Android Auto, let me get out of this screen here. Alright, so as you can see, we have Android Auto. Let's say if I want to play what's on Spotify, I have to keep it really quiet. But anyways, as you can see, everything's up and running. It's nice having Android Auto or CarPlay in an older vehicle. Now, there's a couple of things I should note about this. In my Jeep, for some reason, the FM radio strength is not the greatest. It might be something to do with the antenna connection, because I've installed this head unit in my mom's 07 Pilot as well as my dad's 05 Silverado HD, and so far I'm not hearing any complaints from them about radio signal strength. It's like it only happens on the FM in this vehicle. AM works okay. It might be just this particular head unit, I don't know. But overall, it's really nice having hands-free calling and all that stuff built into this. It's like a new vehicle in a way. Now, one downside about this vehicle is, like, if you're on the highway, if you're on the interstate, it's kind of noisy inside here, and sometimes if you're asking Google Assistant questions, it's kind of hard to hear it at times. Or if you're on a phone, it's kind of hard to hear that. It depends on who you're speaking to, kind of. But overall, it's a huge upgrade over the stock factory 1990s head unit. Now, this can be done on the ZJs on the post facelift, so 96 and 98. This is a 96, for example. You can do it on 96, 97, or 98. 93 to 95, I could say it could be possible, but the dash trim on those is different. So they have a whole different dash trim around this radio, so it would require a bit more modification to do that. And also, that Metra dash kit is not for the older ZJ. But we can't say it's impossible, because it's not impossible. It does require a lot more work. But this is how you can get Android Auto or CarPlay in your ZJ, your post-facelift ZJ, for, I want to say, you'll probably be spending less than $200, probably $150, $160. The cost of the ATOTO when you get it on, if you get it with a coupon. I've gotten these ATOTOs for as cheap as $60. And that's a steal for this unit. This is, although it's a Chinese head unit, it's actually a decent one. It's pretty well built, has a lot of functionality. Now, I should note, this is not an Android head unit. This is technically a Linux head unit. But overall, I like it. It's pretty decent. So that's how you can get a double DIN touchscreen head unit in your ZJ. at least if you have a 96 and 98. It will require some work, but it's definitely doable with this head unit. Okay everybody, so before I end this video, I want to take a moment to discuss what this device is. So this is a universal steering wheel control interface. This is the PAC or PAC SWI-RC-1, and there's one from Metra through Access. I think it's ASWC-1 or something like that. It's a lot more expensive. But what this does is this interprets signals coming from your steering wheel controls in your vehicle, and it translates it to a language that your radio can understand. Now you're wondering, okay, why did I remove this? And why is it not needed for Jeep ZJ? The thing is, now if you're installing a specific radio that requires this, then yes, you wouldn't need this. The AOTO does not need this because the AOTO more or less has a universal steering wheel control interface built right into the head unit for analog SWC only. Now for others, you would need this adapter because all the AOTO can do is interpret analog signals. So let's say for example I install that AOTO unit into a vehicle that has, let's say, a digital signal like CAN bus or GMLAN or Class 2 or LIN bus or iBus and these other buses, then yes, you would need this device to interpret that language and convert it to analog for the head unit to understand. Now the thing is, in the case of the Jeep originally did use a CAN bus to communicate steering wheel controls because the body control module in this vehicle used to interpret the steering wheel commands and translate that to a proprietary or specific language that the stock Chrysler radio would understand, and therefore turn up the volume or turn down the volume or whatever. Now the thing is, with a lot of radios out there, aftermarket radios, even when your vehicle has analog steering wheel controls, you would still need this adapter. For example, this JVC KW-M590BT head unit, which costs, funny note, costs almost 3 times as much as the AOTO. It does not have, I should know, it does not have a dedicated menu for setting up steering wheel controls. That's because this unit, like many out there from the brands like Pioneer, Sony, and others, a lot of those out there, more or less they have a fixed set of language that's used to interpret commands from, let's say, a remote interface like the buttons on your steering wheel. And this harness, which goes with the JVC unit, has this one remote control wire that connects up to a steering wheel interface adapter like this PAC. Now that JVC head unit technically I believe is a Kenwood because I had KW in the model, and matter of fact it's branded as JVC Kenwood, so you could treat it as a Kenwood really. But the thing is, that unit, that head unit, does not have a set menu where it can learn your vehicle's analog SWC. So that's where this comes into play. So the way this works is you buy this product and you follow the directions on the website. You put in your vehicle's make and model, the year, all that stuff. Now my Jeep is just a tad bit too old because PAC only supports back to the Grand Cherokee ZJ back to 1999. Yeah. And basically it's funny, their directions also call for more or less just tapping into the analog circuit going to your steering wheel. But more or less what this does is it interprets, let's say you install this in a vehicle that has analog SWC. You would be given specific directions on which wires to cut and which wires to use, all that good stuff, and you'll also be given directions on how to set these dip switches. Now in the case of my Jeep, the way I had it set up was for manual setup, and you would select your radio, and the funny thing is the directions, you could select AOTO from the brands and it'll give you commands for the AOTO, how to do the manual setup, and it's Funny, the process of setting this up is similar to setting up the AOTO's steering wheel control interface menu. So more or less, I had to set this up, and then I had to go set up the menu in the AOTO's settings. Now, as you had seen earlier, the AOTO, when I switched this out and hooked up the Jeep's steering wheel resistor network directly to the head unit, I had to go in and program those buttons again. Because again, this was more or less just acting like a middleman. And what this thing was doing was putting out analog signals that were equivalent to what, let's say, a Pioneer unit would understand. So this was totally unnecessary. I pulled it out. Steering wheel controls worked fine after I set everything up. Totally unneeded. So there are probably, I will say there are other radios out there that also have the basic functionality of being able to be programmed to interpret analog signals from a vehicle that has analog SWC. So definitely research the vehicle that you're setting up with an aftermarket radio and see if your aftermarket head unit can be directly hooked up to the steering wheel control interface, or excuse me, the SWC connection to your steering wheel. So that's all this does. It's just a middleman between your vehicle's steering wheel controls and your head unit. Again, with most head units out there that have their own proprietary fixed languages that you cannot self-program, this device is totally necessary, but for this application is totally unnecessary. So there you have it. So anyways, that wraps it up for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Hey everybody. Thanks for watching this video from Q channel. If this is your first time, please subscribe to the channel and tick the bell so you get notified of a new video I post. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, leave a comment, and share this video as well as the channel with your friends to get the word out. In addition, I have a second YouTube channel. That's QCompMTDX. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for your support.